So yeah, my name's Nikola. The question I guess I have that maybe we can all hold in this call is there's something that I really get really passionate about trying to work through this question. And the question is, where does our health as humans and the health of the land intersect? Can we reduce our harm on the environment and limit our impact and try to stay within a small footprint? And also, can our footprints be actually of benefit to the land? But yeah, so how does our health as humans intersect with the health of the land? So when I think about that question, I think about myself individually in terms of my own personal health. And then I also think of health in this collective way of our health, community resilience. How do we stay healthy? And when I think about that question, I think about, well, what are our needs? What do we actually need to stay healthy and well? And how are our needs being met? How are we actually supplying our needs? So I know personally, I look at it from a holistic perspective. So I think of health as a body, mind, and spirit connection. We need to have all of those things in order to actually be healthy. And so that's where I've kind of come to connecting with herbal medicine. From what I've observed kind of culturally within Southern Ontario, herbal medicine is still a little bit of a fringe thing, I'd say. And that's not the context in other parts of the world. Like if you look at the UK, for example, medical herbalists are registered and qualified in the same way that MDs are. And they're able to write blood tests or order blood tests and operate in hospital settings. And it's like a much more understood system of medicine. South Africa, it's the same way. And then other parts of the world is much more traditional. If you look at if you go to Ireland, for example, it's really rooted in the traditions and the folk medicine. If you look at Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, these are long standing histories of using herbal medicine. And there's this huge spectrum there of wellness and taking care of ourselves before we get to crisis management. And our current allopathic medical system is really good at the crisis management. It's really good at dealing with okay, you have you need a surgery or you need a bone set and we are in a crisis situation, we need to deal with it. But there's this huge spectrum here that herbal medicine is part of with other healing modalities in keeping us well. And so we look at that and we're like, oh, okay, how do we regulate blood sugar, for example, so that we don't actually end up with diabetes? How do we start to work with our metabolic conditions so that we don't have and develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or deal with and take care of our minor infections as they come up, so a UTI doesn't travel up into the kidneys, or that a lung infection that just starts out as a bit of a damp cough doesn't develop into pneumonia because there's no realm of care in there. So herbal medicine really steps into that place and says, how do we take care of ourselves within this spectrum? What a lot of people say is just what would it be like if we had an herbalist in every home? If all of us kind of had this basic level of proficiency. And it also is an opportunity to integrate and weave together these traditions that come from our lineages and that we meet and can connect to with the science of how we're understanding things now, and bringing those together and understanding ourselves and operating in that joint connective way. And in the same way, in calling on the plants to help us in that way, I'm also assessing the land then, because when we start to connect to who is this plant, it is well, what does this plant need to grow? Who is this plant? This is the lavender plant. It really likes sandy soil. In order to develop the phytochemicals necessary to get the volatile oils that actually offer its medicine, it needs really sandy soil. It needs a lot of sun. Which ones like the wet, to have their feet wet, which ones grow in the understory, which ones grow open in the prairies. And so we're not just assessing the environment in terms of our community health, we're assessing the landscape and the land and the health of the land as well. And we are bringing those two things together with herbal medicine. And that's where regenerative farming is so incredible. The aspects of it where we're having the benefits of regenerative farming, where it's like locking and storing carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. We are increasing biodiversity of the land. We are increasing soil health. We're making a space for the non-human peoples as well to live and be in a healthy way with us. And so that aspect of regenerative farming, how do we grow these plants and work with these plants in a way that helps the land as well, is where I see a little bit more of that question being answered of how does our health as humans and the health of the land really intersect? And when we come down to it, I think it really starts to become more and more obvious of how much those are the same thing.
One of the things that my scholarship has taught me as a skill in sort of socioecological system spaces is to really look at a question and ask what's actually being asked. And so when I read things like dilemmas of greenwashing and capitalism, the need for consumer education and action, supportive policies and legislations, why is that all hard to implement? Where does the region stand? What kind of cultural shift is required? These are all they're different ways to ask the same question. And so rather than engaging in a tactical conversation with you, I have a few short minutes to inspire you, I think, to really look deeply at underlying assumptions and start to really have deeper ontological and epistemological discussions with yourselves, which are $10 words for how do I know what I know and why do I believe what I believe. And so when you put that in the context of Nikola's conversation, where just our relationship as earth beings, as part of the ecological family and not stewards dominant over it that we get from a very warped Judeo-Christian capitalist approach to land and people. And so a good introductory piece to this kind of thinking is Vandana Shiva's book, Monocultures of the Mind, where she deals with the colonial institutions putting forestry where forestry is. And, we have mining is over here and health is over here, compartmentalized bits and pieces of a colonial economy as opposed to, Nishnabek economies that would have been integrated where you can't separate out the seven grandfather teachings from this year's hunting decisions, from how we're going to negotiate with those folks who keep coming up here if something's going on, so like governance in our dominant sort of liberal democratic world is transactional. It's not relational. The notion that we can continue to consume but just swap out, it's called substitution. And so in agriculture, it's input substitution. I'm going to use an organic pesticide instead of a conventional pesticide, and I'm going to kill the water and the oil slower, as opposed to, as Nikola suggests, taking a regenerative approach and asking, how am I here as a partner in soil building for future capacity? And how am I operating in a way that I never take more than what I can put back or enhance in a given season? Otherwise, I'm strip mining the soil. And organic sector that I love and support, and people are doing the best they can in a capitalist system, still often ends up mining the soil just slower and more kindly. But it still leads to the same spot when we're not thinking regeneratively and perennially.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful, Jodi. Thank you for the reframe. And I'm always really curious too of the like what next steps that you see, because you have such a really good like finger on the pulse of what's happening and like a continuous way, like locally and globally. So I'm always kind of like, all right, like what do you see? What kind of trends? Like where do you see us going? So
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing really start to pick up, and it's probably because it's what I surround myself in, and I'm comfortable if it's a 0.3% of the movement, I'm down. Where my energy is moving right now is 100% behind land back. We have the last generation of indigenous folks who are going to be able to make claims based on treaty that won't have been watered down, sold out, or otherwise ransom economied away. And there's a massive pressure for modernization of treaties, which undermine inherent Aboriginal title and rights. And so land occupations over the next 6 months to 2 years, I think, are going to need to really explode. I'm also really hopeful and excited about some of the sort of like really low key technologies that are starting to come to fruition, and they come out of that sort of permaculture type thinking, that sort of systems thinking, or feedstock thinking. And I don't mean circular economy. I mean like really stopping and considering, if I use this versus that, what else does it do? And some of those answers, I think, are in people's heads right now. We don't have them, and we have to have faith that they're going to come out if we create, as Yonka Porta asks us to do, to create the conditions for the emergence of the world that we want, and don't try to operate it and plan it, because you can't plan a global life support systems. But what you can do is notice that where there's, complex watersheds, we tend to have better air and more life and clean water. So we probably want to encourage those kinds of spaces. So figuring, if we can really focus on what actions are going to create the emergence of what we want, rather than trying to negotiate with or fight the system that is controlling and taking us all down right now. It doesn't mean not be aware or engaged, but another tactic, which is to create the conditions around that for the emergence of something else.